Hi everyone, this is Mayan Writes. I'm Mayan. I talk all about writing and storytelling. Today we talk character design. Sherlock versus House, who is the better character? So character is measured in depth, authenticity, and vulnerability. A really cool character that doesn't resonate with anyone doesn't really make for a great story. I'm referring to Benedict Cumberbatch's Sherlock and Hugh Laurie's Gregory House. If you don't know, House was actually based on the original Sherlock Holmes. We're not going to talk about acting. Both actors are amazing. We're just going to talk about character design. Obviously, spoiler are going to happen during this episode. So, if we look at this from, a very superficial point of view, Sherlock is the more attractive character. He's childish, he's adorable. He's seemingly not haunted by a past trauma until the very end, where it's conveniently explained, whereas House is an addict, he's bitter, he's older, he's less attractive. These are seemingly similar characters, but actually they are very different and they work in very different ways, despite having the same flaw and same motivations. And I would argue that one character works better than the other. So in terms of motivations, they're both out to seek the truth. That's the first and most important priority. They chase logic and truth. They disregard emotions, and they're able to see past subjectivity and see solutions objectively. This makes them great at what they do, finding the truth, whether in a crime mystery or a medical dilemma. This is also their flaw, since this incessant chase after the truth costs them personal relationships. The motivation is the same, and the flaw is kind of like the same. And they're both sociopaths, right? Sherlock is a formerly one. He declares himself as one. He doesn't mind hurting others, being blunt or hurtful, and House is the same way. It's never to be nitpicky. It's almost always aligned with the truth within the moment, because that's their highest value. But they both can be very hurtful and push people away, and that's why they don't have a lot of people in their lives. In terms of personal relationships, House has Wilson, Sherlock has Watson. In some ways, these men, these sidekicks, are their weaknesses, and this is a starting point of where they differ. Sherlock is designed in a very absolute way, right? He has some weak moments, but they are far and few, like when he apologizes or faces his own mistakes or feels guilty. House is the same way, but he has a larger element of humanity in his character design, and he's not an absolute sociopath, so he's a full-fleshed man. He has relationships with women, he falls in love, he gets his heart broken, he has sexual desires. Sherlock is a more sterile, asexual character. He doesn't really have a life outside the crime mystery, right? And Sherlock does. I think this is why most of Sherlock's episodes are a lot of the mystery, or even more than one mystery. And with House, the mystery is a big chunk of the story, but there's always a big chunk of the human interaction, the human mystery. House uses his quote-unquote powers to manipulate people around him, getting them to tell their secrets, figuring them out. It's a part of his chase after the truth, right? But it also comes from the human interest. I mean, it's not just because he wants to know everything, it's because he's nosy. It's because he's curious. And Sherlock doesn't have that. He can figure people out very quickly, but he doesn't really want to. It doesn't really bring him any pleasure. So then I think this is what makes Sherlock a lot more humane, right? Because he has these flaws that we can relate to. Sherlock, not so much. And Sherlock likes Watson, right? Maybe even loves him, but he's not that invested in his life. He was the best man in his wedding, but he's not really interested in what's going on with him. House is almost obsessed with Wilson. He gets jealous when Wilson has a girlfriend or even a new guy friend. He wants to know all these secrets. This is a very flawed relationship, but it's a very authentic one. And all this makes House a more humane character and Sherlock a more distant character. It's hard to imagine anyone empathizing with him because he's so different than anyone else. He's almost like an alien. House is a jerk, but we can see ourselves in that sometimes. I think that's why they made Sherlock so pretty as well, not just because it's a TV production, but it's to soften the harsh, alienating character. With House, they initially looked for someone who was not conventionally handsome and not so young because they didn't want him to be happy. That's why they made him crippled, right? They said a young, handsome, healthy doctor wouldn't have so much to complain about. And they wanted this character to be very, very self-destructive. And without all these elements, he wouldn't able to be so self-destructive. And this is maybe the most relatable characteristic he has, because we can all see ourselves in that. Sherlock doesn't have that. He's kind of like a one-way tunnel vision character, almost like he doesn't have any other attributes. Let's talk origin story. So origin story is very, very crucial in a character design, understanding why he is the way that he is. Even if we're not exposed to it 100%, we can see hints of that in the story. With House, it's very simple. He lost a big chunk of his thigh muscle. He got addicted to painkillers. This made him sharper, but more of a jerk, which pushed people away, which made him more of a jerk and made him abuse his medication even more. It was a vicious cycle. But we know this from the beginning. We know this from season 1. It's very humane. It makes a lot of sense. Sherlock's backstory is so strange and radical that I was amazed to see where they took it. And that's when the show lost all credibility to me. So what happened was his even more genius sister killed his best friend when they were all children. And he didn't only block that out and her from his mind, he became unable to form a real connection since then. I mean, who can possibly relate to that? It seems to me like the writers were looking for shock value and not actual storytelling value. And that would make sense. So this is a big no-no to me. If you want to shock me, that's fine, but you have to make the narrative make sense. Even the backstory shows that House is a more humane character, and Sherlock has this backstory that you've never heard before, that you never thought that you would hear. So it's very strange, again, very alienating. Let's talk about the narcissism. That's a huge characteristic in both their characters. So my biggest problem, I think, with Sherlock's character is that he keeps saying how better and smarter he is than everyone else. He keeps declaring it, like how his mind is different than anyone else's, and that actually weakens him as a character. This is exactly the show don't tell sin. House shows us he's smarter than everyone else by just being one step ahead of everyone at all times. He doesn't need to tell him that. They can see it from his actions and his words. This subtlety makes for a stronger characteristic. And it's not that House is less condescending, not at all. He just shows it in his interaction. It doesn't say it flat out, right? So another example could be the Mind Palace, right? So Sherlock has this quote-unquote superpower that is his Mind Palace, where everything is stored, right? Which is, yeah, it's exactly like a superpower. And once you declare it as, if you give it a name, you emphasize it as something that no one else has. House is just as smart as Sherlock, maybe even smarter, but he doesn't declare that he has a superpower. He just shows it to you by pulling this memory or this bank of knowledge that no one else has. He doesn't have to say it out flat out. And that makes him stronger. Let's touch on one more thing, which is theme, because I think it's important, and then we'll sum it up. In House, the theme is everybody lies, even to themselves. It's his job to find the truth. He's the only one who can in this world of people being irrational, emotional, and deceiving. With Sherlock, it's said more than once that his brother and sister might be smarter, so it's not really clear why Sherlock is the hero, because he doesn't lie. I mean, the themes in this show don't really reflect as clearly on Sherlock as it does on House, because House is also a liar, but on specific things that make him human. That says a lot to us about people and about humanity and the place of truth in our lives, and I don't see Sherlock doing that. It's important to say here that there are more themes in this show, of course, but because it's a detective genre, lying and truth is a huge thing in every story that is detective genre. And so this theme kind of reflects on the character itself. And with House, it really elevates him. It makes him, in the center of everything. It makes him stronger. With Sherlock, because the theme doesn't really reflect on him, it doesn't really set him apart, it doesn't really work with that character. To sum it up, I think I love Sherlock. I love the show, I love the writing, but House, for me, is the better character. He is a real man, he's a real human being. His flaw is more relatable, and his backstory is more relatable. He makes sense to me. I can feel him when he fails. He acts in ways I've seen people act or acted myself, though not quite as radically. His self-destruction is heartbreaking because we want more for him, because we know he can do better. I think this character is written perfectly. And though the show did make some mistakes in the end, it's still great writing and great storytelling. I think it's important to say that why this is so important is a better character would make for a bigger emotional effect. Not only will root for her more, but the emotional effect will be greater. So obviously, the whole point of Sherlock's character design was to make him interesting, complicated, extraordinary, very strange, very, very unique. But to me, it lost kind of the humanity, and so the experience was very unemotional. So, for example, when Sherlock faked his death, it wasn't as emotional as it was when House did. So with House, it was heartbreaking because it was an actual person. With Sherlock, because he was such an alien, I think I was more distant with quote unquote grieving the loss of this character. Not to mention the plotline did not make sense because if you establish that a person is self-destructive like House, it would make sense that he would die, that he would commit suicide. With Sherlock, it didn't make any sense. There was nothing to back it up. And so it was so out of the blue and so, unrealistic. But I guess that's a plotlining issue as well. But it was so perfect with House because we knew this was always a possibility. He was always on that balance of self-destruction and redemption. With Sherlock, there was nothing to back it up, so it didn't make any sense. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoy it. If you have any comments or questions, you can reach out to me on all the platforms I have going on. And in the meantime, happy writing.